We are extremely delighted to have actually a group of three distinguished scholars who've been working together, putting the best brains together to work on issues that revolve around remittances, important financial flows, the politics, the political economy angle, and public health spending with the evidence from Africa. I leave it to them to explain the details. Very interesting, piece of work that involves quite a huge amount of data and important new results. But for me, my role here is now to introduce the presenters and co-authors of this paper. And it's a great pleasure to introduce a person who doesn't need a lot of introduction here at SOAS because she has been very active in the Center for Global Finance Seminars, especially during her time at the University of Oxford. And this is Dr. Elizabeth Nanziri. She's currently the director of the African Center for Development Finance and senior lecturer at the Stellenbosch Business School, University of Stellenbosch in South Africa. She has many roles. I'll explain one of them. She's the British Academy Scholar. She's also previously a Newton International Fellow at the University of Oxford Center for the Study of African Economies. And she has a wide experience in research and teaching, having taught economics at both undergraduates and also at MBA and MPhil levels, to the postgraduate and postgraduate research. With a background in policy making as well as practitioner roles in East and Southern Africa. She was, for example, the CEO of the South African Savings Institute, which is under the Ministry of Finance in South Africa and the Industrial Development Corporation. But she also spent a productive stint at the World Bank in the Office of the Chief Economist for African Region in Washington, D.C. She has also consulted for international organizations such as the African Development Bank and some national governments. She very much is in the philosophy of the Center for Global Finance, where research resonates with policy and practice. She holds a PhD from the University of Cape Town and an MA in Economic Policy and Planning and a BA in Economics and Political Science from Makerere University in Uganda, the great Makerere University in Uganda. She specializes very much in development economics, but with applications to finance, behavior economics, gender, and welfare, and has expertise encompassing randomized controlled trials, field experiments, household survey, macro data, very, very well grounded. But the final part of the introduction is the pleasure of introducing her as a very active researcher within a Group C, finance, of the African Economic Research Consortium, which actually is also the body that my work and Elizabeth's works, get together under Group C of the ERC, the most productive outfit, globally and in Africa. But it's also, let me also take the pleasure of introducing Dr. Judith Kabajulizi, who is an assistant professor in economics in the School of Economics, Finance and Accounting at Coventry University, and holds a PhD in health economics from near SOAS, actually, just a few steps away from SOAS, from the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, University of London, a sister university to SOAS, University of London. Her primary research interests are in development economics, has great specialism in the economics of health and healthcare, and indeed has published quite actively in this area, including covering the dimension of COVID-19, and therefore was at the forefront of researching the implications for many countries and also for Africa of the scale of the pandemic of the COVID-19. She's been collaborating with many researchers worldwide on a number of projects, including the institutional effect on fiscal consolidation and productivity, and on the impact of managed exchange rate regime and foreign exchange exposure in many countries, and how this affects productivity. And the third contributor and co-author of this paper is Dr. Albert Muparuri, who is a leading scholar at Stellenbosch University Business School. So we are fortunate today to have the trio, the three eminent scholars, presenting their work to us and sharing with us the insight. And so it is with that in mind that I would like to ask colleagues who are here at this seminar to be very generous with comments, observations that can not only take this work to the next level, but also provide this work as a platform for further research in this area, either by collaboration or even in terms of new research projects that could emerge from this research seminar. That's consistent with the way we work with the Center for Global Finance as a way of being able to categorize and produce work that can go and produce continuity for a couple of years after now. So a great pleasure to welcome the trio and ask Elizabeth to set the ball rolling. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Victor. Thank you so much for giving us this opportunity to present our paper. It is very much work in progress, and it is gratifying to actually connect once again, because we last connected before COVID, and I was physically there, and it was beautiful. But I believe that we will soon meet physically again. So this is the starting point. So yes, we are presenting this work, which we were supposed to have presented perhaps a bit earlier to you. And this paper has been evolving, and you see two authors now, because we have broken it into two pieces. And so one bit is moving with a team of co-authors, and now this particular work in progress, yeah, it is me and Judith. And Judith is online, so I'm going to do the hardest part of presenting, and she will answer all the questions that follow. Okay, so yes, we are investigating a very, I think, tempting and interesting area in terms of remittances and political economy and social services. So we are particularly picking up on public health spending, and our evidence is from Africa. Right. So let's see, can we move forward? Okay. Okay. I hope we can all see my slides. So we are saying here, what is our research question? Okay. So our research questions are pretty much two, or call it one, but split it into two. So we're saying, we're asking a simple question. Oh, I don't know whether it's simple, but you can tell us. And we actually welcome questions. Please, I'll reiterate this. This is very much work in progress, and we welcome your comments and your suggestions and your input. So the question we're asking is, can migrant remittance inflows contribute to the recipient country's public health expenditure? Yeah, trying to link those two up. And how is that contribution, if anything, affected by the governance institutions within the country, the recipient country, so to say? So what is the background to this study, or how do we envision this? So we're saying that several African countries spend below 15% of their budget share, as agreed upon by the Abuja Declaration of 2001. We are all guided somehow, somewhere by some of this declaration. For instance, between 2000 and 2017, governments in Africa spent about 9% of their budget share on healthcare, but the private health, on the other hand, was over 34%, yeah, which is way higher. So we're saying that over 40% of the total health expenditure is constituted of out-of-pocket payments in these countries, or at least in almost half of African countries. Okay, and we're saying that this financing structure is kind of regressive because it contributes to inequality in access to healthcare, especially in developing countries. So overall, we see that public provision of social services is actually increasingly becoming inadequate in many African countries. On the other hand, there is something interesting that remittances are increasing. Okay, we are seeing remittances increasing in many developing countries the world over. And during the past 3 decades, we're seeing volumes of migrant remittances increasing up to over billions, say 480 billions, say in 2016. As you can see, we have so billions in which currency, but apologies over there, 400 million US dollars, which can easily translate into billions in other currencies. But what's important is that 70% of those inflows or remittance flows were migrant remittances, remembering that we do have other remittances such as, your ODAs, your FDIs, but it's quite humongous to see 70% of global remittance flows, constituted of migrant remittances. This is quite important going to developing countries. And what do we find? We find that micro-level evidence shows that recipients, especially those households, deploy these remittances towards healthcare, education, food consumption, and basically the social services that probably are lacking somehow, somewhere within the countries that they stay in. Okay, so we then ask a question that can these remittance flows influence social service budget allocation? And you will see why we bring in a question like this, because of issues around resource mobilization in developing countries, because developing countries do not have good resource mobilizations or enough resources, and majority of them are indebted. So we're trying to look at this high influx of remittance flows, migrant remittance flows, can they be leveraged in one way or another, or can governments find a way of using them to complement, for instance, budgetary allocations towards social services? Okay, so then our research objective becomes, investigating the mediating effect. We're looking at the mediating effect of governance and democratic institutions on the contribution of migrant remittance inflows to the public health budget allocations in Africa. So there is that political economy. And this is the long story of institutions. We all know the work of Asimoglu, Johnson and Robinson. So we are playing with this notion of governance and democracy or democratic institutions in countries, and trying to see whether really this is an angle or an interplay that we can investigate if indeed we're to look at remittances or any other external form of financing that comes into an economy. So speaking about financing, or where we are, we will be contributing to at least 2 major strands of literature. The first one is external financing that I have talked about. Resource mobilization is a challenge for developing countries. So this is an old debate where we look at external financing being required by countries to meet their development goals, growth and development And this is the, it emboldens the work of Jeffrey Sachs, who talks about, this external financing, such as loans and, this all DAs, FDI. And we're saying that they say, or according to him, countries need this financing to meet their development objectives, and it reduces poverty. Yeah, but others, such as Danisa Moyo and Easterly, they argue that no, it actually perpetuates poverty. So you can see that there's no agreement there. But the reason why probably there's a bit of disagreement is the fact that such external financing has a debt obligation along with it. So countries become indebted. Now, we are saying that remittances, on the other hand, are coming to countries or to households. There's no element of loans, there's no repayment, and in one way or the other, they become available to a government. And perhaps government can think about using them as resource mobilization tools. And we can think of, let's say, diaspora bonds that have been used by Ethiopia, yeah, in the Renaissance dam. Part of that was diaspora bonds. So we can think about remittances as potential tools for mobilizing resources in a country. And moreover, when such remittances are in the country, they are available to a country to use in the form of what? Their tax, perhaps. We talk of exchange rate, and my colleague, my co-author, has done quite a lot of work on exchange rate regimes. So there's a fee that we pay when we remit, and there's a fee that recipients also pay when they receive. That's part of what goes into the fiscal capacity of a country. Okay, so we are looking at that literature and contributing there. On the second strand of literature is the relationship between remittances and political economy. Now, this is an area that is not so well researched. We find limited research in that space, but there is evidence that indeed, depending on the governance structure, remittances have a relationship with political economy. Say, for instance, the few papers they are find some form of a moral hazard issue that when remittances increase in a country, the policymakers, or let's call it the legislators, tend to renege on their responsibility of providing social services. And especially for Ambrosius here in Mexico, they discovered that what was happening was that remittances encouraged, or complemented private investment towards provision of private services. And in the process, what was happening is that for as long as the recipients were able to get their funds, they did not care about the policymakers and holding them accountable to not providing the social services that they were meant to provide. So what the elites, which is what majority of us tend to do, you're trying to maintain the status quo. You don't want to antagonize the system because you're getting your remittances. And for as long as that happens, no one is holding the policymakers accountable. And so they get away with providing suboptimal services. They get re-elected by the elites. The elites are the voters. But if they're comfortable with their private flows, those migrant remittances, then there's probably fewer voices to hold these guys accountable. So in the end, there is that reneging, there's that moral hazard issue. Okay. Then Ebeke, I think this is the other study that we know that addressed a couple of countries, or the broader, a larger cross-section of about 86 countries, both Africa and non-Africa, but developing countries. And they really find, yes, that there's some element of crowding out of public provision of social services such as education and healthcare. Okay, so it is just a few studies there, and we feel that we need more studies. We need more context-specific studies to actually investigate this link and how it could compromise the potential role, if at all, or how it affects the potential contribution of remittances to the public provision of goods or the budget allocations. So the is limited studies, moreover, on Africa. We have found probably one study, that's the Baker study, but we are happy to be drawn, to other studies if they are there, but we want to really look at what is going on the continent, where, for instance, we have painted that picture for you. Okay, so we also contribute to the use of a different approach, which is relatively newer, but I'm sure we have econometricians in the audience. So we're trying to look at the mediating role, but we are not using this mediating role, as you will see in our results. So the study design is such that with the issue of instruments, because remittances are not random. Yeah, you always have to find an instrument for them. And we all know the challenges of finding an instrument. Now, this new approach talks of a mechanism variable. Okay, and so the variable that we're thinking is going to mediate this relationship is instead used as an IV, as an instrument, instead of using it as a control variable like our colleagues have done. Like that's what Rebecca has done, and Ambrosius and them used some IV instruments, external instruments. Okay, so moving on, what are the main results that we find? Maybe this is not surprising that almost half of the African countries have weak governance institutions, governance and democratic institutions. But the important result that we find, given that weak and governance or weak governance and democratic institution framework, in that plethora, we find that remittances lead to a decline in total health expenditure. The increasing remittances also lead to a decline in public health expenditure. That is the crowding out, but we find an increase in the private health expenditure. So those are the results that we find so far. Okay, so let's just see, how do we conceptualize this? Okay. I've looked at, it's me who's moving backwards. I was wondering what was happening to me. Okay, so this is how we conceptualize our study. We have, we're showing you an activity diagram here. So this activity diagram, we're saying it gives us the indirect relationship between governance and democratic institutions, which is gov at the core. Yeah, we have this at the core, at the nucleus. And then we're saying, I think what I forgot to put here was the arrows, the direction. So we're saying that we're moving from the inner circle to we're moving outwards. The first point of call there is that these governance institutions play into the employment opportunities. Yeah, the governance and democracy, or whatever the case may be, has a role in the employment opportunities of its people. And we're also adding social services. Yeah. Now, from there, if you move further out, you're coming to the living standards. Of course, employment opportunities, I earn an income, or social services, my welfare is taken care of. So this fits into the living standards. As we move out, we get into economic migration. If I'm not happy with my living standards, I'm forced to move outwards, elsewhere, across the border, to look for greener pastures, as they call them. That is economic migration. From there, then we get the migrant remittance inflows. So we can see, or we're trying to show you how we're moving from governance and democratic institutions outwards, or to migrant remittances. I should mention out, however, as you have seen me, as I'm showing on the right-hand side of that slide, that so we're saying that we're moving from governance. Okay, so we're moving from the governance institutions. Do you see my? Okay, here we are. So we're moving from governance to employment opportunity or social services delivery, living standards, economic migration, and MRI, right? But I need to mention that there's quite a few studies that pick up this relationship. So it's not necessarily linear, as I showed there. So we have seen some studies looking at, living standards and employment or economic migration. This study looks at how poverty leads people to migrating. But we also see lots of studies on how MRI fits into living standards. So when migrants remit back, what happens? Those are some of the studies we quoted earlier. People are able to afford, education and health and food. That's into living standards. But there's also MRI, migrant remittances, into economic opportunities or employment opportunities. So this is the case if remittances are invested in economic income generating activities, so that not everything is consumed, but we are beginning to see that some recipients invest. Okay. Now, the relationship we are now looking at in this study is to move from remittances to service social services. Okay, so we're moving outward now to the social services, and we are saying that if we're moving back here somehow, somewhere, we need this nucleus to be embedded in our analysis, and that's where we're talking about this interaction. Okay, what we've called the mediating effect that has been investigated by some of the papers, some of the few researchers in this area. So our hypothesis, therefore, would be that remittances crowd out public health expenditure in the presence of weak institutions. That's what at least we've seen. Autocracies tend to find in autocratic institutions tend to reveal such a finding, at least in one setting. That's what we found for Mexico. And remittances, on the flip side, crowd in private health expenditure in the presence of weak institutions. How do we go about it? In terms of our methodology, we're going to take, a two-stage least square approach with fixed effects. What do we want to do? We want to find out whether migrant remittance inflows, might compromise or what influence they will have on health expenditure. Okay, so we will take a two-stage approach. Why? Because there is potential endogeneity arising from remittances. Remittances are not random. As if you've seen, somebody makes a decision to migrate or to immigrate. So people that migrate sometimes are well-to-do because migration is costly. So there are reasons why people migrate, and there are those that do migrate. So it is not a random thing, like if we have a disaster that sends people into being, becoming refugees. Now, there's also potential endogeneity between remittances and this dependent variable. Yeah, so that relationship that we try, it's not linear, this potential reverse causality, and so we need to take care of those endogeneity issues. And there are several unobservable confounders that these fixed effects approach will help us. What is the limitation? The one that we pick up at the onset would be finding an IV, a valid instrument. That's why we take a new approach of getting the very confounding variables or mediating variable and using it as an IV instead of using it as a regressor, as the other papers have always done. Okay. All right, so this is our model. So we're interested in that mediating effect, and we say that there are two ways of doing it. So you can do it explicitly, as in many of the papers. You have the the mediating effect. You can have the variables and have an interaction term. But in this case, you also see we have an endogenous remittances. We'll have to find an instrument for them and use the predicted values of remittances. But what we're doing here is to use that variable called governance, which we're saying is the mediating variable, as the Z. So Z denotes the vector of instruments. And in here, our vector of instrument is the electoral democracy index. I'll tell you where we get that from, and a composite index of governance, which we construct from the usual governance indicators from the WDI. This is a control of what is it? Rule of law, voice and accountability, security, and those indicators. So we have control variables that include tax based on and the literature we have surveyed. So if there's more tax revenue, surely there should be more allocated towards public spending or social service spending. If an increase in debt service ratio will definitely compromise public spending. ODA, sometimes including, we've combined it with FDI. Sometimes it comes and it's sector specific. So we could see a positive relationship there, and GDP per capita, seeing to what extent the growth or the pie is shared amongst the people. Okay, we also have our country fixed effects and the usual stochastic error term. And so the remittances here, are the X's, yeah, and we're taking everything as a percentage of GDP. Okay, where do we get our data from? The data is starting from 1996 to 2020, and we're getting all of this from the World Bank development indicators. So there are 55 countries, at least in Africa, as we know, but we have a huge limitation here of data points, such that putting the countries together, it's an unbalanced panel, and we let the model choose. And in the end, the analysis we're showing you now is based on 24 African countries for which the data was available. So we have total expenditure, which is the additive, the sum of public health and private health expenditure. These remittances are private transfers by migrant workers, and then governance indicators, control variables, as we've said. So the VDEM database, this is the database that was that provides only deals with the governance. It's an alternative to the governance indicators that we get from the World Bank World Development Indicators. So we picked out one variable there, the electoral democracy. It's an index, and the reason why we picked it is because it speaks to the ability, the fairness of the elections, and this is close to the voice, because we see voice and accountability, but this one is particularly speaking to elections only. Elections. So we combine those two. We use them as two instruments in one model. Okay, so the governance index, we construct an index from the democratic indicators, the governance indicators from the World Bank, and then the VDEM database, this comes as an index already on its own. What are the countries that we have in here? Those are the countries in our sample. Yeah. And again, please feel free to talk to us about what you feel about the countries that ultimately show up. Okay, so how does the data look like? Okay, so first we want to check whether there's any relationship between remittances and the domestic health, the total health expenditure. And I do apologize, this is not 2014. Yeah, this is 2019 over here. And wherever you see this, please forgive me. we just I forgot to change the heading as we were doing more tests, last minute tests. Okay, so we know that this country, like Lesotho receives up to about 40% in remittances. But what is of interest to us is this, I think, the relationship, the fitted line, and where countries sit. Okay, so of course we have Lesotho here as an outlier in terms of remittances, remittance receiving, but how does it fare in terms of expenditure on health? Okay, so we have a lot of countries here on the side. This is so much because of the value of the volume that they receive of remittances, but also whether they lie above or below our fitted line. So that is on the total, the domestic total health expenditure. So what's driving this relationship that we are seeing? It's relatively flat. So let's see what's happening. This is what we have for public health expenditure. So there is actually a potential relationship between remittances and public health, health expenditure. So we can see this. I guess what we take to the data in the econometric exercise is to check whether this really can be realized. So we are probably beginning to see that, perhaps remittances can be leveraged, by governments, but we will see what happens. Okay, so this is a steep kind of a fitted line. Let's see what's happening on the private health expenditure. This is quite flat, meaning that what we saw in the first graph was being driven by this relationship from the private health expenditure. Now, if we look at our instruments, which is the confounding, the mediator variable, the mechanism variable, as we call it, how does it relate to remittances? Because if it has to work as an IV, it needs to, at least it should be a relationship. And indeed, we see a relationship there. This is governance institutions, that's the index. And then this time we have fitted remittances. Let's look at the electoral democracy. Again, it's just barely there, but we can see that there is a relatively small relationship. I can say the slope there is something I can't put my, figure to, but I can leave this to you. Please, econometricians in the room, please talk to us whether this is something to write to the editors about. Okay. All right. Let's see our results. Again, just saying that in the presence, why do we say weak governance? Because this is what we, if we look at our variables here, if we're talking about the governance, where does everybody, where are the majorities? It seems to be scattered all over for this electoral democracy. We know that a country like Morocco barely has elections. Okay, at least that's what I can point out to. So you have Egypt over there. So we do have this variation, the variation in these indices, even in this one here, you can see it's this variation that we want to take advantage of, okay, to see what is happening in terms of affecting the remittances. That said, where do the majority lie? If you can see, if this is our zero line, over here, everybody is pretty much on the weak institution. So we're operating from a weak institution framework. And moving forward, again, if this is our scale, you can see, well, quite a bit scattered, but we feel that we're operating within a weak democracy. This particular index here was stretching up to about 0.8. So we just changed the log here, but it was stretching further away. And most of our countries are below average in terms of democracy. Okay. All right. So that is why we are saying that in the presence of weak governance and democratic institutions, we find a decline, which is a crowding out of total expenditure. But if we disaggregate it, it's a crowding out of public health expenditure and a crowding in of our public expenditure. These are the results, the actual figures. So what I want us to look at, so we did this IV, the new approach of using the mediator itself as the IV, and these are the results we get. Okay, so two things to look out for. We look out for the first stage, at least statistic, F statistic. So we save because we have two instruments, and I think, and the critical value, the decision rule is we should have at least 4 times the number of instruments, at least for now. We are above the 8 and we're good to go. The Hansen J is the one that would give us the the exclusion restriction. That means that is a relationship between, let's say, the governance structures and public and our dependent variable. Okay, so the Hansen J should be above 0. I agree that I acknowledge that this is well close to 0, but these other ones are relatively high in these two models. Okay, so this first model is for the private health expenditure IV. And so increasing remittances would lead to an increase in private health expenditure of about 1.8. Yeah, significant at 10%. And we have also tried to run the FE, the fixed effect model, in which case now we use we include the two variables now as regressors. So if we move with the IVs alone, we can see the crowding out that we're talking about, yeah, of 0.1, and the same thing happening in the domestic total. So we can see that in the total, the total decline is 4.2, and the bulk of it is being driven by the decline in public health. But we can see the crowding in happening, and this is robust. Even in the fixed effects model, we still see this crowding in, and we still see this crowding out. That is significant. Okay, so let's move on. Yes, we control for all the variables that I talked about, the controls. And then what do these results tell us in relation to the literature? I think our results are consistent with Ambrosius, okay, and Rebecca, the two studies that we have, and also Grable, who found, well, what he calls his moral hazard. We find another result. Well, we try to liken our results to something interesting. So what we can say is that remittances may not influence public health expenditure on social services in the presence of weak institutions. That is our key finding. And this finding is actually similar to Mansoub and colleagues that studied something similar. They were looking at fiscal capacity. Yeah, we're fighting about resource mobilization. We're wanting countries to increase tax revenue. And according to them, this was quite a huge cross-section of countries, both developing and developed. And this is what they found, that fiscal capacity may not influence, sorry for the typo, may not influence social spending in the presence of weak institutions. So it would appear that, yes, we're trying to increase the fiscal capacity, and we're saying that remittances can actually also contribute to that fiscal space, but in the presence of weak institutions, they may not influence, public spending towards what we want, which is social service expenditure. And so we need to maybe place some caveats here on our studies because of a few limitations of data. What we wanted to do was to try and split these countries between countries that have good governance, good democracy, good democratic institutions, and those that are weak. In doing so, we ended up with just about 5 countries that can cross the line of good institutions, and the bulk of the countries, were characterized as weak. So, which is again what I said earlier, that this bulk of our sample countries is got weak institutions. So, we would have loved to see what happens when we handpicked, countries that had good institutions, some of which are in the Northern African region, and conducted the study on individual countries. We did indeed find that increasing in remittances increased public spending, but that was on individual countries, not as a block. Okay, so we would have loved to do that, but you can help us on how to do it better. All right, so as I conclude, yeah, we do find the crowd out effect of public health expenditure by migrant remittance inflows when governance and democratic institutions are weak. And such institutions have a bearing, yes, on the legislative ability or the ability of legislators to actually agitate or make pro-social service budget allocations. And we can recommend tentatively that countries that receive large volumes of remittances need to strategize about how best to leverage, remittances, or make them complement the public health budgets. Because what are we trying to do? We want to meet our targets of universal health coverage. So I'd like to stop there and thank you and open up for questions. My co-author is online and we will, we will take the questions as they come. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you indeed. We show applause for a very interesting presentation, Elizabeth.
Nice.
Very well motivated presentation. Clear in the terms of the literature, the methodologies used, and interesting findings. Throwing some light on the way governments might be strategizing if they can forecast the migrant remittance inflows. They may be able to push the burden a little bit, on health expenditures. On the other hand, they could use those opportunities of a migrant remittance inflows to boost their health sectors into a modernization. So absolutely interesting work. And just make me think about, a number of this could be extended in many, many, many ways to fall into, health financing patterns, health financing choices by the public as well as, the government. There is quite often some mention about health medical tourism, how individuals travel across the world looking for, healthcare, and whether by combining migrant remittances with available budgets, that may solve or create centers of attraction for health tourism. It could be an extension of this work to look into the developments in health tourism and the policy options for both for the private sector, individuals, and also the government. I'll make a number of observations, as we go, especially in terms of the sample, in terms also the specification. There's quite a lot of a good ground for exploring and digging deeper into the variables and even the combination or interaction of variables to be able to capture more insightful news already, or even extend the present work to dimensions of health finance. But let me first open the discussion to the floor, and we can now start to get the cut and thrust of this paper. So I see the first hand is up. Let me check the charts. And maybe while Athena and Meng would help me check the chart to see if there is a new comments. Let me just look at the hands up. I can see a hand by Hong, and there's a Moses Tefula. So Hong, please go ahead. Hong is a colleague, a professor of financial economics at SOAS. Hong, please go ahead and give us your contribution.
Okay, thank you very much. And I found that the topic is very important and very interesting as well. And I think the presentation is very clear already. But I guess Elizabeth may guess what kind of question that I'm going to ask. So I'm going to ask about econometric questions or questions on the econometrics. So it's good that you are using instrumental variables in this study, and I see the necessity of doing so because of the endogeneity problem. But you used two variables as IVs. One is the so-called government institution, and the other is electoral democracy, whether or not. So I think those are definitely associated with your remittant variable, because the better the governance, the institutions, the more attractive that people send money back. However, my question is whether or not those IVs are also associated with your public health expenditure. And my answer to myself is a yes, because a better governed, government or strong institutions people would think they will have a much good, much stronger prevention of public goods, for example. So I see a kind of endogeneity here. And I'm excited to ask this question because I think nowadays, if you look at some papers, they are using the so-called supply side IVs rather than the IVs that you pick up from the host country or the recipient country themselves. So in your case, for example, I can imagine you can, because you know the sources, the sources where do those remittance come into the recipient country. So you at least can use some macro level variables of the sources country. For example, whether or not that country has been performing well, or in terms of their GDP or something, or labor market indicators. So if you are picking up something from the sources country rather than the recipient country, your IVs will be really external. Yeah, so that's what we are trying as well. So we are doing something. We are using supply side IV as the in the type of studies which is similar to you. So so that's my comments, and I hope this is I think this is very important, and this is very interesting, and it is very feasible that you do so. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much, Hong. As usual, you appreciate the work being presented, and that usually make some constructive suggestions of going around a very important methodological component, of this work. Maybe I'll give an opportunity to Elizabeth and Judith for a quick response.
Okay. I'll quickly, Judith?
Okay. Yeah, that's very fair. But Victor, I was suggesting, is it okay we collect a number of them because some could be related, and then we respond and take on all the comments? Because I'm looking at the clock. I don't know how much time we have, so that we don't miss out on any.
Yeah, thanks, Judith. We still have an hour. We budgeted 2 hours for this, but we will proceed as you wish, if that's okay with you. If you want to leave, but I thought the comment, the cut and thrust discussion will bring in different views and maybe further suggestion, or even an extension of a suggestion. As I can. For example, I was going to suggest that, yes, the supply side instrument variable was a great idea, and maybe the discussion will show how this is able to generate much more compared to the other types of instruments. Something that could be kind of a discussion.
Yeah, thank you very
I
much.
can respond to
Hong.
that.
Okay.
I wanted to briefly give a response to that because I think, yeah, my co-author then can add to that. We actually did try that initially when because we've just been growing it slowly. We do know where they're coming from, the remittances. And what we were looking at was, yes, the GDP in those countries indeed, and the employment rate or unemployment rate, because we talked about economic migration. So the extent to which, the unemployment rate in the, migrant economies, could influence or could act as a good instrument. Yes, we tried that out. If the countries are fewer, then you can converge to a source. Yeah. Econometrically, maybe Hong, I know we can link up with you to help us further if you're now looking at the countries in a block like this, because they don't all, we will then be having a lot of external, like there will be lots of instruments. So which country are we going to choose beside? Because looking at the bilateral flows, yes, the originators, you'd have USA, you'd have the Arab Emirates, you'd have you have Europe. So if it is a few countries, like if it's a bloc like East Africa, we found that majority of the migrants were going to UK, in which case it was easier for us to use, let's say, the GDP of the UK or unemployment rate of that country. But if there are many, then how to approach that is probably where I would request for your help. But thank you. Yes, we did come across it. We tried it out on a smaller sample, and it kind of, we got confused a bit. Then we left it, but thanks for bringing it up.
Yeah, what about
Judith?
weighted average? What about weighted average? So you can top 5 or top, maybe top 3 or something, but you can always construct something from the supply side, and you have the information on that side. So
yes, we do.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Hong, for that suggestion. Yeah, thank you very much. We note very much. We note very much your observation that yes, the instruments we have selected are likely to be, influencing bi-directional with the independent, with our public health spending. That is very fine. And yeah, it's true. You mentioned that our challenge was, like we said, when we tried the source countries, we were wondering how we're going to do, and we did a small sample for East Africa, like Elizabeth has said, and we were able to say, okay, we can use, the source GDP or unemployment rate. But that's a very good suggestion, and I'm sure we're going to keep in touch with you, or even Victor, because Victor said he's also suggesting the same. We see how we can improve that. Yeah, thank you very much.
Excellent. Thanks, Hong, and thanks both Elizabeth and Judith. So I move to, actually the hands are going up, so we move very quickly. So I will call upon Moses, Aisha, and then Charles. Dr. Moses Tefula, previously UN, and now a researcher watching the key interesting ideas on Africa. So Moses, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much, Victor. I think this was a very interesting subject. I just had one quick question. We discussed the source that was very well presented, which is from remittances. It was the application where I thought the focus was on health. But would the presenters also be considering other applications? I know that housing could be one of those, education, and so that relativity, the significance of health versus the other applications, how would they deal with it in refining their research? That is my observation. Thank you.
Thank you, Moses. It's very interesting that I was jotting down some comments in the presentation. And of course, Moses was not here with me in the room to have read the comments, but we convey the same. My thinking was whether it would be possible to disaggregate the migration remittances inflows into the various categories. And yes, I have housing here because my sense is, as given I'm a certified diaspora, my sense was that part of our remittances goes into housing, and the disaggregation will enable us to say, not only how much goes into health compared to housing, there is a fundamental question of substitution. I think the substitution question will really completely take this paper to another level. Substitution is, for example, let's look at let's be surreal a little bit. If the remittances are being sent for housing, for construction of a house, for your parents or relatives, or even for commercial purposes, and you find the recipient is critically ill and has to be taken for medication, definitely the housing will be cancelled, right? And the person will be taken for treatment because maybe government expenditure is very low and private sector treatment has to be done at a cost of remittances. So there is a switch, a substitution. Now, if the estimation was being done, for example, using a Zerner estimation technique, which is also used as instrument, but could be, a seemingly unrelated regression, one could easily see how the coefficient switch between housing and health. So health expenditures have other substitutes. Maybe we're extending the work to blow it up beyond its remit, but it's an interesting aspect. If it doesn't work, it would deserve a footnote to say that the housing could be, because money is fungible, it's fungible. You send $1,000, it could be used for constructing, a good house, or it could be for treating the patient to live longer and the housing be extended time T+3. Okay, this kind of, but thanks, Moses, for this. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Moses. That's actually very, very interesting. Would use this current data because I've looked at in video data. So, for example, in Uganda, so it is education, health education first. Then, of course, there is buying property in terms of land, housing, and then doing business and so on. So, yeah, it would be really a good idea. We'll really try and explore, the different social services, but in terms of the different uses of the remittances, and we see whether there is that switch, as you suggest. That would be very, very interesting. We'll see how it is. Elizabeth.
Thank you, Moses. I think education is a bit easier because we're looking at services that are provided by governments as well, all right? And for which we have declarations and targets, say if you look at the SDGs as well, we do have these targets. And the housing is not necessarily government provided, okay? So while it is quite interesting, we don't necessarily have this, the crowding out effect that, for instance, Grabber finds and Ambrosius is a case of these governance institutions trying to hold legislators accountable in a way or the other, and seeing, finding a way in which these remittance inflows can be used or leveraged, in instances or areas or economies with low resources. So we want to complement, we want to leverage these flows towards government provision of services. And I'm not sure whether how we're going to look at the housing and its provision. It's an interesting one. It might be falling under investments. Yeah, it might be falling under investments, but we can look at it. And most importantly, the data. Yes, so data coming in, WDI and the sources, the few that we have have remittances as percentage of GDP, disaggregating it into its uses is going to be a case of now maybe taking it to country level and looking at different data sets, which are going to be necessarily household surveys. What do you use the remittances for? It's worth investigating, but yes, I have to agree. Ebeka did the same thing. Ebeka did health and education, the two sectors, indeed. So in adding the education sector, we will be probably extending Rebecca's work from 2012 to the latest years. But Rebecca did that. So I do agree with the application. We will try and look at, yes, what the data allows us to do. If we cannot find the application on housing, then yes, we will try and find another application. Of course, education, the data is easily available. So you're restricted by the data that you have, but that's a good one to do the comparison. I don't know whether you have something to say about the response that I've given for the fact that some of these are not necessarily the social services, and whether it doesn't change what we were looking at, at that one. Yeah, Prof.
Yeah, actually, our emphasis. Thank you very much, Elizabeth. Yeah, we really want to take it. What we have behind at the back of our thinking is that governments should be seen doing much more towards spending for social services, health, education, and so on. So that this is a case we're trying to make to policy makers. Much as it is interesting for other users that come in, but the point we want to emphasize is that how can we have governments increase their budget allocations for these social services? So that might be what is really limiting us to that. But like Elizabeth said, yeah, we will extend it to as far as data can allow. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think actually health and education, absolutely interesting. So thank you indeed, Moses, for that contribution. So I now call upon Aisha, a former of the Center for Global Finance, and now actually interacted, I think, with the Judith at Coventry for some years, and yes, and they did now Wolverhampton.
Yeah,
aspiring to move into the UN.
In the coffee room, I said, you remember?
Exactly. Aspiring to move into the UN in 2023, has just finished a very big deck for the UNDP. Absolutely impressive. And so go ahead, Aisha, I know you're interested in these issues now.
Exactly. So thank you very much, Prof. And it's great pleasure to be in this maybe last seminar of the 2022. Finally, we could make time to join. And it's very good opportunity to greet my former colleague, Judith, and my conference friend Elizabeth, where we meet in many African countries. We have chat, we have coffee, we even go around in Morocco. Yeah, so we have good time. So today there was a big coincidence for me that I have another meeting in the morning with United Nations Capital Development Fund. There was a seminar where the topic was on driving financial inclusion for migrant women through digital remittances, insights for migrant centering and gender smart remittance innovations. So the topic was highly related with what you were explaining. You are focusing on health. They were focusing on overall social development. Just I would like to give some suggestions based on my fresh knowledge that I gained from the morning's meeting. You may have an extension in your work by taking into account some demographics, looking at the gender specific results, rural urban results, which would definitely enhance your policy implications, more specific policy implications that we speak to the different segments of the society. And also digital remittances, digitalization is also a very important component. Yes, in addition to governance, I think it would be also important to take into account digitalization of remittances in your, because it is very important, and it is also easy to find instrumental variables, because many digitalization policies are external, like internet penetration, mobile phone penetration. So this is another angle that where you can expand your research. I have also one suggestion on governance, your instrumental variable. Have you used, I forgot about the time duration of your work, but have you thought about using legal origins for your work? Because legal origins is one of the core governance, one of the core instrumental variable, where most papers, whichever work on institutional economics, refer as the main instrumental variable for many of the countries. So that's all my suggestions, and nice to see you all. Have a nice Christmas, have a nice year. See you next year.
And very good suggestions, Aisha, as usual. Thank you very much. Yeah. So these were just comment suggestions. I don't know whether Judith, Elizabeth, they want to
Thank you very
say
much.
something.
Thank you very much, guys. These are very, very interesting suggestions, especially when you suggest that we should think of extending it to include demographic characteristics. It would be really interesting, and this is probably worth thinking of. I cannot say on my feet now how, but we will think about, putting in gender aspects of this. Whether it's rural, urban, I'm not very sure, but these are very interesting. And thank you very much for bringing this fresh knowledge from your morning seminar. We'll consider this. Yeah. Elizabeth?
Okay. Yeah, Aisha, thank you. Again, I'm going to go to the same kind of concern, because working with data, there are studies that will be macro in nature, and there are those that are micro in nature. And if I'm looking at a country fixed effects, so are we going to say, first of all, it's going to be to the extent to which we can disaggregate remittances. If we can get a data set that can disaggregate remittances, that is the starting point. And again, that would call for a type of micro level survey. So that might be a bit tricky. We might not be able to go into that with this particular study, and because of the cross-sectional nature of the countries. Yeah. But what I like about what you have said, and it is kind of the governance. When you talk about legal origins, this is the Asimoglu paper, right? Because these countries all have different legal origins and colonizers, we probably would be talking about a weighted average once again, because they do not have a homogeneous colonizer. They have different colonizers, you see. But taking the same, think around what Holmes said, we can then look at a weighted average. If the bulk of the countries were colonized by, British or Francophone, or whatever the case may be, because I think that might be easier, because we do talk of Francophone Africa, Anglophone Africa, so they're only privately colonizers, and we weight that and see how to work around legal origins as a potential external, again, instrument. I think this we will try and investigate it. These other extensions, I'm a little bit skeptical that we can do it, because we are not using micro level data. Yeah, that's my concern. But otherwise, it would be okay with the survey.
Thank you. Yeah, Aisha, you were saying something.
No, I was just thanking.
Thank you.
Thank you, Aisha. Thank you very much.
Much appreciated. And you, Aisha, and the response by Judith and Elizabeth. Yeah, yes. Sometimes the need for a micro data makes it impossible to look into disaggregation, like gender, rural, urban. but you may as well acknowledge it somewhere in the footnote or something to say you are aware, but data could not permit. Thanks indeed. And now we have, yes, our good friend, Charles Cadogan from the University of Leicester, who presented a very exciting seminar about two weeks ago. 2 weeks ago. I was in Nairobi by that time in the ERC, but my colleague Kemi chaired and passed on to me the great comments. Thanks very much, and good to see you again, Charles Cadogan, Dr. Charles Cadogan. Please go ahead.
Hi, Elizabeth. I haven't seen you in a while. I know I should have turned on my camera. Now I'm seeing all the sun hiding my face.
This is a pleasant surprise.
But my question is actually, that, anyway, I don't know if I should say this in mixed company, but you're looking so much younger at times. Anyway, my comment isn't that profound. I just as soon as you started the presentation, I got this visceral response. I said, "Oh my God, Lesotho is all the way out there on the right side, you know, and it has undue influence in the data." And I'm sure you saw it. I want to know, you know, did you kind of just do 2 runs to pacify the people, the critics like me, saying, "No, we're going to either do one thing, we're going to take out Lesotho, do another run." Or we're probably just going to use a log transformation of the data. And of course, once you use logs, that kind of destroys some of the ability to interpret coefficients. But I'm assuming, you know, that's just that's the only, because I don't know much about the other aspect of the literature. So I'll just look at the specification.
Well, this is the biggest surprise of my day. Charles, I haven't seen him for ages. Thank you very, very much. Yes, I had a last presentation of one of my papers at his university over there in Leicester. It's so good to see you. I'm hoping to see you again. So now that movements have started, thank you so much for this. Yes, what we have done is to leave the methods to pick up the data, select the countries that finally end up in the analysis. And so you'd find that that smoothing. And yes, the variables were transformed because we did have quite a range. I mean, when you have a standard deviation of 84 and you have you have outliers really in Africa. When we talk about debt service ratio, you are hitting 100 plus. Those are indebted countries for sure. So in others, like even my MRI, migrant remittances, you have countries that have 0, that don't receive, and then you have those that receive, like let's say do up to 40%. So there is that smoothing that the data does automatically. That is why in some cases you see that the countries are dropped. Yeah. However, I do agree with removing some of them. If you think about a country like, say you're saying Lesotho is an outlier on the upper end, but you also have country like, say, South Africa that barely receives remittances. Some countries don't receive a lot of remittances, especially those that you fall to the far left. So we can handpick. That's the other question that maybe I would also throw here to the broader audience. We could handpick. Yeah, and say, okay, let's just run some other, regressions or exercises, conduct exercises on small samples that are handpicked, just to complement what the method itself does, because it does its own selection of the sample. So we can do that.
I was wondering if you have enough data points to try perhaps just a quantile regression. I don't want to get econometrics go crazy here. I'm talking about doing a quantile regression in the context of, or even, the fixed effects type stuff, something just simple. Just run a quantile regression, look at the stability of the coefficients after you just kind of play around with the log transformation, log, or just a semi-log. Sometimes that's sufficient. You don't have to necessarily drop points, and then there might be other things you can do leverage wise in terms of to correct for heteroscedasticity and just divide by the standard deviation or the square root of, something like that, square root of X or some crazy stuff like that. And sometimes something simple like that works. in removing these leverage points.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And we will definitely keep in touch with that. I know I try, I can count on you for the econometrics. Thank you very much.
These days I'm an economist, I'm a decision theorist, I'm removed from economics. Well, that's not true, but yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Indeed, let me see. Any further comments, observations, questions? I think these hands are legacy hands previously put by Moses and put by Charles. I am not sure whether they want to come back or these are previous hands. Let me check in the chat. No, I think we don't have any further comments in the chat. Let me now turn to Moses. Are you trying to come again, or it's the previous hand?
No, it's a previous hand.
Okay,
I'm trying to
thanks,
remove
yeah.
it.
We'll put it down.
Yes.
Let me go back to my observations in the notes I was taking throughout the presentation of a number of the impression. Yes. I think my first observation came up in the specification. I think that was equation 1, the regression equation, in which there is x as the variable that represents the migration remittance inflows over GDP. And then Z is a vector of instruments for democracy and other variables. In that, whether this is, could be, if it is 2 separate variables in the equation. I was actually trying to find an opportunity of whether we would be able to find the interaction terms in the regressions. The reason what led me to think of interaction terms is because in the abstract and in the first arguments, I think in the summary, you have the mediating effects, which would be suggesting like a transmission mechanism, whether the variable can either attenuate the impact of migration remittances on health expenditures of different types, and you do an excellent segregation there, or whether it will accentuate, increase the effects. And one of the ways of doing that is to create an interaction term. And I think an opportunity might come up in which you're able to do that. And then you can pronounce yourself very, very clearly, both in the direction of impact and also the quantitative values of the coefficients are generated. Just to, I think in terms of my head, in terms of, think on my feet in terms of how this could be done. The other points, I think with the colleagues have already mentioned it, and trying to find whether the remittance is going to impact on health, whether we could find a substitution. And I think actually your response was spot on to say it is between health. The two inequalities plaguing many countries worldwide are the inequalities in health and education. This is the current knowledge. So having health and education, looking for a way, maybe you want to do another paper on education, and therefore you don't want to spoil the fun of producing health questions here, in which case that's absolutely fine. Perfect. Your next paper here at the Center for Global Finance in June next year will be looking at remittances and education. Why not? That will be equally sale to this audience and worldwide. Okay. I mentioned the question of healthy medical tourism. Maybe a discussion of this point in the introduction of HERP, because it's one of the puzzles we have with many developing countries compared to developed countries, where routinely huge expenditures are being spent, especially by the elite, on education in the industry world that would otherwise help the which would possibly help in the health infrastructures, kind of back home. I think it's a question that would be of interest to many people watching governance issues, because you have weak governance, and maybe health tourism arises from weak governance. Okay. Yeah, and then I had another point observation, just thinking about this. You have a number of countries, and you did a good job of showing where the samples are coming from. But I think I just glanced very quickly, and maybe you'll forgive me if I'm just messing up the interpretation. But I just noted in the number of countries that there are countries which are super high income, at least very good income. They have transitioned from low status to middle income status, and then you have a number of countries which have been in the quagmire, steep down in the very low income status. Maybe the behavior changes as the income changes of countries. One could argue that could maybe then what would be is initially do all the countries, and then second stage maybe for a robustness checks. Now there is no paper which says now into a good journal without doing robustness checks. People are obsessed with robustness checks, that the paper can't get into a top journal without having a section robustness check. So maybe we'll see that income matters. Maybe in this argument, income matters. Actually, that would be a good title for the robustness check. Income matters. Maybe it doesn't matter. Is whether countries at different income levels behave differently, or even where like oil-rich, resource-endowed countries behave differently when it comes to this this regularity that you uncover in your results. I had put one point, and then I removed it because I couldn't find I couldn't get my hand around it. I was thinking, couldn't there be a theory, an economic theory, maybe not necessarily Arodeburo type of type, but an economic theory that would link migration remittance inflows to health expenditures. Because I couldn't come with one immediately, so I kind of put an X across. But since you're gonna sit on, you're gonna sleep over these comments for a couple of days, maybe you can come up with a theory. If I come up with one, I'll let you know, but I didn't come up with one. So I could look up a strong theoretical foundations that you could build on to pronounce yourself, on these. Yeah. So actually, I stop here. I think this is but this is very inspiring work, absolutely inspiring work, and has a lot of finance in it. Health expenditure have large fiscal footprints, fiscal footprint on every economy, So absolutely important. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Victor. I would just say a brief word before Elizabeth wraps up everything. But thank you very much for these very, very important points, specifically the last one. I don't know, Elizabeth, an economic theory that, yes, that is something we've been grappling with. And we wrote down something, but since you have agreed that you'll be in touch with us, we'll be communicating to see whether this is the best what we have, whether that works for our paper. And we know very well there's no top journal. I mean, top journals would want to see this. Yeah, economists are not easy people, so you don't just throw things at them. So we'll be doing that. And also You've mentioned a very important point I picked up about, stratifying countries by income levels to see whether the institutions and the income levels and, and then what, yes, that's something very, very interesting, and we will hope we'll take that up. One thing I wanted to talk about is really the question of medical tourism, actually. I do teach some a module at LSHTM on global health policy, and this is my topic, medical tourism, and we note, that there's a lot spending by elites or whoever from developing countries into this. So really, that's something to think through, how we can tap into that. That's one of the things that we're really trying to look at, whether this money can be, or try to show policymakers look at how much goes out, if we can show them how much goes out by their people. I mean, a simple example, when I come from Uganda, we see members of parliament, government officials spending this, and probably try to put it into them how much it would be beneficial if the institutions, if we had, stronger institutions, but also that our public health expenditure would be boosted by investing, money in, let's say, international hospitals, so that I'm sure many governments already know this, but it doesn't do any harm emphasizing this in such a paper, trying to bring out the impact or the positive effects of, reverse, we call it reverse expenditure for medical tourism. So but thank you very much to you, Victor, and everyone else for all the comments. We have taken them down seriously, and we will be working on them and then sharing probably on individual participants here, like, your suggestions, and I hope you'll appreciate an email or two, just to ask, what do you think about this? I mean, do you have any, kind of citations on this and that? Thank you very much. Over to you, Elizabeth.
Okay, Dave.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Victor. You always think off the cuff, and you throw it out there, and you tease our brains. So I'm gonna. I like, yes, the idea of interaction. Yes, that's the norm. And I think now that we do definitely have external instruments, that interaction will definitely be there. I think the reason why ran away from that was after doing that little sample, and we didn't know how to accommodate the multiple sources of migrant remittances. I think we just packed that and looked for an option, a new method that uses, the mediator as an IV. But now that, Hong has talked to us about getting the weighted average, so now we can go back to our external instrument, and then you can start seeing this interaction, because econometrically, you'd have to have this interaction with the predicted values of remittances. So you run that first stage of factors, predictors of remittances, then you predict the values, predicted values, and then interact them with these very governance that you're talking, the indicators that we're talking about. So there are two indices. Those were the two indicators, and then they will pitch one by one, or even going to the level of disaggregating that governance index itself and just use the actual indicators in the model. That has also been done. That's number one. Now, when you talk about medical tourism, there is something we had done. You're very right. Who are the people that are spending out? Some of them are these, our very own legislators. So what we were actually arguing about was that just having government increase its public expenditure, the budget, is not in itself sufficient, because the funds might not trickle down to the individuals. And I think earlier we had started by looking at health outcomes as a qualitative measure and move away from just a quantitative, because this is a quantitative measure looking at the public health expenditure. And what we were saying was, actually, you can see an increase that legislators can agitate for more funding going to the health sector, but those funds do not necessarily go to the people. They're not people are not benefiting. So what we had done was to try and look at infant mortality, maternal mortality as, you know, qualitative measures, outcomes, to see that it's, you know, to what extent can actually remittances improve the healthcare outcomes. That way we would say that, okay, they're pushing and agitating for funds, and those funds are actually going to the people and not ending up in medical tourism. Because that has implications that actually a lot of funds are going into the budgets, but those funds are not going to the people in there, or the citizens that should be benefiting. And part of the, you know, the mechanism or the leakage is that medical tourism, the people can, the MPs can afford, somehow they find ways. Now, the challenge we had there, or I don't know how you feel about that, and anybody on the call, is yes, looking for a qualitative measure to kind of see if our results, you know, if it will actually add value to our results. But somehow, somewhere, we feel that quality of health is a long-term issue. Yeah, quality of, you know, if getting maternal mortality down, infant mortality down, goes beyond just allocating funds and making sure that, you know, accessibility of drugs or hospitals are facilitated and they are resourced and all of that. So we kind of got, we hit a snag there. So, but I do agree that that could be one way where we could, of bringing in medical tourism and also education tourism, just to use the other word, because they're taking their children out. So that we thought looking for a qualitative outcome, healthcare outcome, maybe would have been one of such an avenue of answering that question somehow, somewhere. But we will think about it more. That was the best we could bring closer. Education as another application. I'm happy to say that my the Albert that was supposed to be on this paper is actually a PhD student, and he's looking at pretty much education. The whole thesis is looking at remittances and political economy and education sector in and out. I think he's picking a couple of East African countries, and that's why he's working on. But if we do add education, water and sanitation, that is exactly almost replicating the paper by Ebeke. Yeah, ABK was looking at Africa plus other countries like Asia, your developing countries, but we have picked on just Africa. So we would clearly be replicating ABK's paper, only that he stopped at 2012. Maybe that would be part of the contribution of extending it and narrowing down the scope. I just don't know how you feel about it, because I'm sure we have a lot of reviewers on this call who can actually talk to us whether that's a good enough contribution. Then in terms of the economics, the econometrics, we look at it. I like this income. Now, when you talk about income, please allow me to also ask this question. What are we, do we have to look into the provision of health care, yeah, by governments? Because governments that are well-to-do might also be having public health care provision that is 100%. Whereas countries that are poor are probably looking at cost sharing, something like that. So does this not bring us into now, because that's again something that we had at the onset, that okay, now would we be required now to look at more granular policies, healthcare policies of these countries? I'm asking this question. I don't know whether I'm opening a can of worms for ourselves or a black box for ourselves, Pandora box type of, but please help us out here. I think those are the questions that I'm also throwing out here in response to what you have asked us. But thank you very much. What do you have to say in terms of the few issues that I have raised, especially maybe on the last one? Splitting by income countries vis-a-vis the policy, healthcare policies in the countries.
Yeah, thank you so much, Judith and Elizabeth, for appreciating all the comments from the various colleagues in this seminar. I think you are right that one could even go, granular into some of the details to look into the composition of health expenditures and the implications. But I think in terms of income, just simply the broad categorization would help. And then the underpinning arguments would be why there is a high propensity of expenditures on health as income goes up. The propensity to expenditure is, if incomes are going up and countries are transitioning from low income to middle income, or if you categorize the countries in the sample by income, is it true to say that the high income countries are associated with high expenditures? You have good health expenditures divided into public and private. But would that still hold if you go up the income bracket? Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't, but it would give you an angle without necessarily going into the reasons why this happens to be the regular finding or observation. Yeah. But it also have great implications. For example, you mentioned sustainable development goals of the UN. That would help a great deal, because we would be arguing that indeed they focus on the way you say countries should contribute 15% of their GDP to health, and that helps a great deal. Maybe other countries, high income countries can, maybe resource endowed countries can, and others cannot. And that remains to be seen and covered in the empirical investigation. Great, yeah.
Thank you.
I saw Hong with a hand up, but I think she has pulled it down since. Now I see Chelsea's hand up. Maybe Chelsea, do you want to come again? Chelsea Kodogan, do you want to come again? And Hong, do you want to come? Yeah. Please go ahead.
I just want to make a quick comment that kind of keys off of a suggestion you said that that the point that you pulled off the table, I'm putting back on the table. About a possible economic theory.
Okay.
And I vaguely remember, I think of all people, Oliver Blanchard, about 7 years ago, did an open economy macro type model, Mundell Fleming type model, looking at inflows. And it was an IMF working paper. So I think that might be a place to start. But of course, I don't know. I've been far removed from international finance, so I don't know what's going on in that world at this juncture. That's just a suggestion.
Thanks very much. And it's worth looking at, because yes, there is, the categorization of government expenditure, and that may motivate the way of thinking about it. Absolutely helpful. Thanks indeed. Hong, welcome back again.
Yes, so I thought that theoretical question, the theory, underlying theory is very important. And as usual, I like it. So I'm thinking what the underlying theory is there because you are talking about public good prevention mainly. Yes. Of course, you divide it into private and public government prevention, but this literature should be public economics to me. And what will be the fundamental issue for African countries, for African governments when they are providing public goods? It's finance. So it's the lack of finance. So I think, yes, you can check the robustness of your results by splitting countries into high income level and low income level. But I would like to see something that you make the connection with the development of the financial system of African countries, because I think financing is the fundamental issue here. And the lack of financing is the most, I think, the urgent issue for them in terms of the public good prevention. So therefore, and then it's nice that you link remittance to the financial market of the local economy, because for a country that relies on remittance, I think this type of income may be a kind of financing, source of finance to the society, to the financial system. In at least the liquidity of the system will be higher with this type of inflow. So I think, we have a lot of, you have a lot of opportunities that provide you the chance that you make the connection between the topic and the financial development. And that's my interpretation of the underlying theory.
Well, thank you very, very much, actually. Thank you for nailing it in, Father, because we did. I think that is I remember mentioning it briefly, and that the literature that we are contributing to, or part of the body that we are contributing to the literature, is external financing. Yeah, external financing and a country's country's growth and development. And I think this is actually, yeah, nailing it down, because we are really telling our students that remittances are promising. They're promising source of finances that countries can actually leverage. And I think this is exactly what you're talking about. How can they leverage them? It's also through, yes, the financial system. How can they leverage them? It's through the financial system. Because right now, the whole story and the whole conversation that we're having is about the cost of remitting. And the reason why the cost is high is because of the poorly developed financial, transacting mechanisms that right now we still have over 10% in terms of remittance costs. Yeah, and why do we have that? Even when we have this digital, because I think somebody talked about the digital innovations, that might have been Aisha or somebody, this digital innovation or digitization of remittances, we thought that with digitization, we're going to have costs coming down. But you find that in countries, even South Africa, where we are, where you have a properly developed financial sector, remitting is quite expensive. Sending money from here to any place using either Western Union or MoneyGram is quite expensive. And so we were worried why we're not seeing that that relationship, as in the cost of remitting vis-a-vis digitization. Fintechs as they're coming up, we don't see that, although costs are coming down. But the Southern Africa region is quite an expensive corridor, or has one of the most expensive corridors, and that is mainly because of South Africa and some other corridors, yes, on the continent. So the financial sector, I see this, so I just would like to acknowledge this. Thank you very, very much. We will, try and bring this out more emphatically and bring the link out. And yeah, thanks, Charles, for the paper. We will look at it. I know I trust Judith with the theories and the frameworks. She's good at that. And she's closer to SOAS than Stellenbosch. So you can rest assured she'll be on the train coming to you to develop this model. And I'll be happily joining in online. No. But thank you very, very much. I think these are brilliant ideas. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, excellent. And thanks very much, Hong, for coming back, and Charles Corrigan for coming back to this. We are almost running out of time. It's been an excellent, enjoyable seminar. 2 hours passed so quickly because we're having fun. The work is absolutely interesting. 2, it has great promise in terms of access to a very good journal. And 3, it has really uncovered so many possible extensions of this work that in the course of 2023, we are likely to be here again talking about these aspects of migrant remittance flows and healthy concern. Even in the context of the, there's a new term that has, in the context of the new term that has come up now, the common good. So a Nobel Prize winner at Jean Tirole at the Toulouse School of Economics has come up with convening his counterparts on discussing the common good. I think, health is a common good, should be a common good for all of us to enjoy, irrespective of our incomes or social class or whatever. And I think this there should be a footnote on the first opening of the first page of the introduction to refer to the common good seminars by Jean Tirole at the True School of Economics, drawing us the common good in education, common good in health, and this is contributing to that kind of discussion of the common good, in which almost more than 10 Nobel Prize winners have been contributing to tell us about, where the world should go, in terms of going toward the common good. With those thanks, once again, to Elizabeth, Judith, and the co-author, who is not here physically, but of course has contributed a lot to this, Dr. Albert Muparuri. And thank you to all the seminar participants for your great discussion, ideas, and for being able to make the time to be here with us. As we started, I said at the start, this is the last seminar for this year, 2022. We look forward to much more creativity during 2023. All it remains to say is to wish you a great festive season, Christmas, and Happy New Year. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And
Thank you very much.
happy holidays.